Welcome and thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. Could I just have a show of hands of how many people have been at our first two meetings? Just want to get a sense of, okay. Some of what, that's okay, thank you. Some of what you may see tonight might be repetitive if you were at our last subcommittee meeting, so I just put that out as a disclaimer. As you know, we've had three subgroups from this committee. One that took a look at what it is that the community wants and what the community has asked our committee to do. Another subgroup looked at health, and we have some information for you to leave with tonight on some risks and benefits of both a natural turf field and an artificial turf field, with the references so that you can go back and check and look at what we've given to you. And tonight we have CDM Smith here to really talk about the nuts and bolts of the project. And what I mean by that is taking a look at the turf field, the natural turf field, the artificial turf field, all the pieces that go along with that, the stadium seating, lights, all of those pieces broken down, and really showing you comparisons. Just data, okay? There's no decision on which one it is or anything like that. We really want to give you information on both sides of that. And that's really what we've been asked to do by town meeting. So we'll have a presentation for about 45 minutes, and then we'll have an opportunity to ask CDM Smith any questions or hear from you any of your opinions or concerns at this point in our process. Okay, welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming out for this meeting tonight. My name is David Young with the firm of CDM Smith. With me here is Scott Langren as well, a registered landscape architect. As Nancy said, we have 20 plus slides to go through to give you brief project history of how we got there. I've been involved in various portions of this since 2012. Then we'll review the current project. Talk a little bit about grass growing here in New England, specifically Falmouth. Talk about the natural turf field and the artificial turf field projects that have been brought up to a preliminary level. And then talk about the cost of each of those. And then get into a discussion of some of the pros and cons typically considered for the different types of fields, and then be happy to answer any questions that you have at that point. A brief project history. As I said, I started on this project back in 2012. We were hired to do a preliminary evaluation of where was the best location to put a football field up at the high school. Our focus at that time was on artificial turf. And so we looked at multiple sites, and the site that we're here to talk about tonight was the site that was selected by the committee at that time. In 2013, we were then authorized to start doing a design for that project. Again, that was around artificial turf. We looked at different options, though, for lighting and the seats and the locations and all those things. And after several committee meetings, the final design was put forth for public bidding, and you received 3 public bids in the range of $2 to $2.4 million. Now, that wasn't a full project cost, that was just for the contract documents at that time. In 2016, we were hired by the town to look at the potential of putting another natural turf field up at the high school as a replacement for the field down at Gov Fuller, or actually for replacement of lacrosse field, right? Kathleen, at the high school.
It was the idea of the senior center.
When the senior center was going to take a field out, yes. So we prepared that, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on in the presentation as well. And then here we are tonight, 2017, looking at the comparison of the natural versus artificial turf fields. This is the site that was selected, as I said, in that evaluation back in 2012. To locate you, this is the back lot of the high school, main entrance to the high school here. So Brick Kiln Road would be over here, and Gifford Street over here. So this was the site. You can see they used to have some field athletic projects there. And then this is where, just a different view of the site to better orient you to the site. The site that was looked at for another potential natural turf field was up on a hill over in this area, and you will see that later as well. So the current project, from common components, whether it's artificial or natural turf, includes a field surface area of 235 feet wide, 390 feet long. So that accommodates a field of 195 by 360, typical football field size. And it includes a bleacher on one side with approximate seating capacity of 810 seats. And press box would accompany that. And for handicap accessibility reasons, we have to put a lift in to get a handicapped person up to that press box, so that's been included as well. The whole site is fenced for control of who can actually get on the field, for if you're charging for events or just to protect the field surface itself. There's a small concession, storage, restroom building that would be a pre-engineered type structure located between the basketball courts and the field itself. And then the field would be lit. There are 4 standard light posts, computerized lighting projected down onto the field now, so you don't get shadow effects or stray light outside the playing surface. And it would be at the 50-foot candle light for cable production and for small ball sports to be played. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Scott, who's going to walk you through some of the, actually some of the reasons why we're having a discussion tonight over artificial versus natural turf. So with that, Scott.
So I'm going to talk just a little bit about grass growing in general and the challenges of high school sports with regards to grass. Obviously, spring sports start early in the spring, which you'll see on the next slide is before the active growing season of grass. With different climate conditions, whether you have a late winter or a really wet spring, that can affect both the grass growing and the playability of the field surface. And then maintenance of grass, regardless, is critical in terms of fertilizer, liming, aeration, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a graph actually from UMass Amherst that they have in their BMP turf manual, and we put some overlays on it regarding this particular topic. But this really shows cool season grasses are what you're talking about in New England. That includes bluegrasses, fescues, etc. And basically this is just showing, when grass grows, shoots up here, roots here. This is March, through the end of the year, showing that grass starts to grow and sort of reaches its peak and its sort of main establishment period in the spring into April and May, sort of peaking in late May into June, and then tails off, and that's when you see lawns turn brown in the summertime, and then peak again in the fall. This has a lot to do with moisture, temperature, and other factors. But those are the 2 main factors. Temperature being a main factor, which most people don't know, but a lot of the cool season grasses don't grow well above a certain temperature, so they sort of go into dormancy in the summertime. But overlaid on this is basically your spring sport season here and your fall sports season. So you can see in March, when spring sports start, the grass is really just starting to that uptake and hasn't really established that well. So it's a challenge when you start to put players on the field to grow grass. This is the MIAA, the Mass Interscholastic Athletic Association. They're the regulatory body that sort of oversees all sports in Massachusetts, and this is their actual spring 2018 calendar for spring sports that would be on fields. All starting in March first contest the end of March and then into May. So if you just go back on this again, you know, that's a real challenge when you look at the optimal growth time and as things are growing with regards to this calendar. These are just some Google Earth images of the facility. The one on the left taken in April of 2012, and you can see, you know, some of these fields are just starting to green up. This field had a replacement down the middle at one point, probably the previous season, where it was resodded, and that sod is not done as well as the other grass in the field. The one on the right taken in May, where you can see the wear patterns down the center of the field. So it's a challenge to grow grass in general, and it's a challenge under these, you know, athletic field conditions when you have a lot of sports on a complex to really maintain it to optimum performance. The one on the bottom, sort of a typical thing that you'd see in wear areas in front of gold mouths, etc. This one taken in Falmouth. So one of the things that David mentioned we were tasked to do was a natural turf preliminary design as part of this new direction from town meeting, and that's basically what this is. Those items that David discussed, the concession stand up here, the 800 plus or minus person bleacher right here with the lift in the back, that field that he described right here, and then there's fencing, etc., which are common to both the natural and the artificial turf field projects. So we had shown some breakdown of cost before. This is a simplified version, make it easier to read on the slide and understand, just broadly categorizing the various elements that go into the natural turf field, totaling about $450,000. Just for the field. That's not for all the other elements around. We have that summarized at the end of the presentation. And then artificial turf, you can see, is a very similar design. This one's rendered a little bit differently because this was for the last project. But you can see a little bit better here the restroom concession stand, the bleachers, and then the other sort of appurtenances related to the overall project. So as David said again, the town committee previously interviewed various turf manufacturers and vendors. They selected a 2.5-inch height slit film turf product, and with a rubber and sand infill mix. This is basically showing that typical cross section and then a typical artificial turf field. At our last meeting with the committee, we presented this overview of different synthetic turf materials. This was actually prepared by the Portland Park and Recreation Department, Portland, Oregon. But it's a little hard to read on the plan. But they're basically looking at different factors related to infills, from health, environment, et cetera, sort of comparing the various things against each other. We talked about the various types of infills available, have it listed here on the slide. And in those discussions with the committee, sort of arrived at EPDM, which is a virgin rubber product, so it would be a rubber and sand mix, as probably the best alternative to SBR, which has a lot of negative press these days. So again, a similar cost comparison for the artificial turf field, and again, it's the field only. This totaling just over $1 million here in the bottom. Now we're going to talk a little bit about maintenance costs for both natural and artificial turf fields. Listing here a typical program of maintenance for sort of professional grade turf management. These are things, and in these assumptions, we're assuming that it's all contracted out services. And so we in our own experience, and then in preparing for the presentation, sort of asked some of our clients, what they have done on their high-use athletic turf fields in terms of both program for maintenance as well as costs, and that's where we've come up with these costs that are presented in the $25,000 to $30,000 a year. You know, it's dependent on how many times you mow it, and et cetera, but this would be sort of a typical program to get a you know, top-grade athletic field. And then similarly for artificial turf field, the typical things that you would do during the life cycle of the turf, including painting, which we also represented on the previous one, that ranging in the $7,000 to $9,000 range annually. And then we've looked at numbers of play per year. Natural turf, obviously, as I said in the beginning, is limited by climate, by rain, and not wanting to overplay the field. So this basically shows, you know, 7 months to 30 days, assuming there's some days that you'll lose for rain, coming to 180. And we were asked to look at it for a 16-year life cycle. And then on the bottom, the same for natural. The bottom one, that's actually mislabeled. That's supposed to be artificial turf. So the bottom one's artificial turf. It's not natural turf. I mislabeled that. I apologize. But basically comparing it, you get a lot more, and that's standard in the industry. It's basically a 3-to-1. You assume you get 3 times as much use out of an artificial turf versus a natural turf field.
Excuse me,
Yes,
can you go back to that slide?
absolutely.
Your comparison, 16 years. You're stretching the life of a artificial turf a little bit there, aren't you?
In this, yes, but we're going to show you that on the next week. We're replacing it in that time period. So what this gentleman is saying is you don't, in an artificial turf field, it has an 8-year, basically warranty surface time. So you would expect to replace it anywhere from 8 to 9 to 10 years, and we've accounted for that a couple slides in advance. And so, again, the maintenance costs are up top, which we just talked about. And here, I guess, is getting to what he was saying. We're assuming that you'd have to renovate your natural turf field, maybe at year 6 and 12, at about $100,000 a replacement, assuming you're replacing the full surface of the field, the sod. And again, at year 8, you're replacing the artificial turf at about $600,000. So over the 16-year life cycle, that basically gives you the range of 6 to 680 or 712 to 744. And then, so in summary, again, the construction cost of just the field and just the artificial turf field only, the annual maintenance cost for each, the life cycle costs, and then putting those plays in again, it basically sort of works out to, you know, a range of $220 to $250 per play for natural turf, $80 to $90 for artificial turf.
Excuse me. Do you have anywhere the information's available for that $25,000 to $30,000 maintenance cost? I mean, so is that on a field that is in decent shape and that's just the maintenance and the upkeep? Or is that like a disgusting field that's run down? I mean, what is that, what's the scale we're working with for that 25 to 30?
That's the assumption that you have, I would say, a new field that you're trying to maintain
Okay.
over its life cycle. So not starting with a field that's in horrible condition necessarily.
Okay.
It's maintaining a field that's in decent shape, and you're trying to maintain it or make it better and playable.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, as I mentioned, we talked to some of our other clients in other towns about, you know, fields that they maintain for athletic purposes and contract out mowing, contract out fertilizing, aerating, top dressing, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where those costs are from.
So do you just present this, or do you have any knowledge as far as maintenance goes?
No, we have knowledge of maintenance, yes.
So if you had a field that was to be run down severely,
Mhm.
do you have any idea what the maintenance would be, say, over the first 5 years alone?
Well, I would say if it was completely.
Just to get it back to, like,
Yeah.
par.
I would say if it was completely run down, you would probably renovate it and then start from a renovated field versus trying to slowly bring something back, which you probably would have very, small luck of doing, given that you're gonna play on it continuously. I think it would be better to renovate, which is what the previous slide talked about at year 6 or year 12, replacing at least assuming you had a decent sub-base, decent soil,
Yep.
renovate the turf completely and start from that and try to keep maintenance up every year from there.
So not like, 200,000 a year, 50,000 a year sort of deal?
Yeah, because
Just keep
you'd
it,
be
just
throwing sort
start
of
from scratch and,
good money against something that's just not gonna ever be up to par.
gotcha.
So this is a total project cost summary, and I apologize, it's a little bit small because there's so much information that we're trying to show, but this gets back to the whole project that we mentioned at the very beginning. So this is the natural turf field on the left. This is another natural turf field, the one that's behind the high school. And then this is the artificial turf field. And the reason we did this, there's a master plan that the town had prepared 2 years ago by Gale Associates, where they recommended adding significant athletic fields at the high school, and basically either creating 3 new artificial turf fields, or sorry, 3 new natural turf fields, or 1 artificial turf field. So we're sort of comparing 2 new fields against 1 artificial turf field here. But again, with total project costs, this is site preparation, and these are similar for most of these things. So site preparation, field construction, the bleachers, the lighting, the fencing, concession restroom stand, and then overhead and profit, engineering, contingency. So this is 2.3 million here, this is just under $1 million here, and this is 3.1 million. And so you can see that creating 2 fields is about 3.3 million. Creating the 1 artificial turf field is about 3.1 million. These are some natural and artificial turf sort of pros and cons. Again, things that we covered in the previous meetings with the committee, but natural grass, obviously, it's grass, so it absorbs carbon dioxide, it produces oxygen, it reduces stormwater runoff and pollution, filters stormwater, it's cooler than artificial turf. The cons are the things that we talked about, the challenges of growing grass in the spring and the sports schedule as well as the fall. It's not resilient typically to frequent high-impact activities. You can have frequent closures due to weather, and requires watering, fertilizer, all the things that you all know about growing grass. Artificial turf, the pros are that it's playable basically all season long. Less expensive to maintain, does not require fertilizers or pesticides, doesn't require watering. The cons being that it's hotter than the air and makes the surrounding air feel hotter, especially in the summertime, late August. It does require replacement every 8 to 12 years. Again, 8 years is the standard warranty given with all artificial turf products. We've had some clients who have replaced them at 8 years, and some clients that have replaced them as late as 12 years on high-use fields. So it's a range depending on how they're maintained, depending on the product itself. But there has been a range that we've witnessed. And then another con is just general negative public perception.
Can I ask you a question?
Yep.
Are there differences in temperature between the rubber field and the cork field or other products?
There have been some reported differences between some of the natural cork infill materials versus rubber. It's not, I don't think it's very significant, but there is some difference. The negative of some of those natural infill materials is that there are some limitations on use and in more maintenance costs, and that they need to be replenished more often than the rubber infills do. They also have a tendency to float if it gets inundated with water, and it does freeze. So if you have some early spring sports in a late winter, you can have some lack of use due to freezing, or if there's some use desired over the winter time, if the field is cleared, it can be hard because it freezes.
I'll speak to some of these. My name is Pat Murphy, Director of Finance and Operations for the school department. At our last meeting, there was a discussion that suggested that we could just come up with an additional slide that addressed a few Falmouth-specific concerns. Concerns are topics. And the first point is really referring back to the Gale report that the town commissioned to take a look at all the fields across the town. And the major recommendation that came out of there was town-wide 3 artificial turf fields or
I found this on the web for the
that's strange. Or 9 natural grass fields town-wide. The ratio of 3 to 1, very strange. The ratio of 3 to 1 comes up in the literature on a regular basis, and it just comes up in sort of the normal discussions that you have with athletic directors, coaches about the use of these fields. Very specific Falmouth issue, geese. We have geese, lots of geese. We use lots of different methods to try to repel the geese. And it's extraordinarily frustrating. If anybody has conversations about geese, we'll entertain those. The other 2 other ones, the terrain. There's sort of this misconception that the Falmouth High School campus has lots of available land because of you look at sort of the map and you look at the trees behind the high school. That land behind the high school, if any of you have kids who are cross-country runners or anything like that, that land is up and down, and the topography of that land is very, very difficult. It's and we found that out a couple of times, but when the senior center was discussing coming over to the high school, we were saying, hey, we needed to save the what I refer to as the wind turbine field directly behind the high school for an additional field. What would happen if we built a field, quote, in the woods? Is there availability? And we did find some space up there, and we'll get into that, but there's not a lot of flat land up there. So the limits of the existing campus is something that we do have to be aware of. And then just very clearly, all we're talking about here is potentially 2 grass fields to 1 artificial turf field. So the idea that Fuller Field would be still available to the high school athletic programs, for whatever athletic programs, I'm not saying football, would still have to be in the discussion. If we're going to continue with the understanding that sort of 3 to 1 ratio. So if people have other sort of Falmouth-specific concerns, we'd like to hear those. But I just want to make sure these folks do have a couple more slides. Would you need that?
I went to the school committee meeting on this when they gave their initial presentation, and I asked you about a field on a spot on Locust Field Road, and no one seemed to know anything about it. Simple 5 minutes at the assessor's office. There's a flat field, 3 building lots past the high school. It's 4.97 acres. It's owned by the Peterson family, and it's assessed at $140,000. There's also land behind it, which appears to be about 3 acres plus. I'm just wondering why nobody investigated this.
So acquisition, land acquisition
Yeah.
is what you're suggesting. Okay, that's
Well, I mean,
something to
it's-
discuss.
I always question driving by why the hockey rink never went there, you know, and why it was never used, and it's just sat there. It was a perfectly flat, open field 20 or 25 years ago, and now it's just overgrown. Seems like a no-brainer to me, at least investigate.
So what you're suggesting is that another option would be doing some land acquisition to expand the campus for the high school. All right.
But
Does anybody have,
to add to this project, even if you're putting an artificial turf field, because this is about the project that moving the football field to the high school. So if we, to acquisition that land, would cost us more money to put another field on it, or put this field on it. So that doesn't really, I mean, it
This
doesn't have a lot
land
to
is
do with.
assessed at $140,000.
Again, but this is
Nobody's
about
talking
this
in
project.
those small amounts.
This is about, we don't want to mix up the fields in town that need help in adding more fields with our project of moving the field to the high school.
yeah, but.
Really?
But the
What
idea,
kind of logic is that?
but the general idea that land acquisition would be a Falmouth, would be part of these Falmouth-specific concerns is something that it's not within your purview to investigate, but if that's.
It's
part
a
of it-
different option.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Well, again, I question, why wasn't it investigated?
sure.
It's right in front of your nose.
I don't have the answer to that, Mr. Fernand. Would you like to continue?
The only other thing we have, which may be related to that, would be the other site that was evaluated was the one that was up in back of the high school. That was the flattest area within current town-owned campus property. You know, another option could be looked at to try to lower the cost of this second field by looking at acquisition cost and what that could be, but this is the comparison that you would make to that.
Can you kind of describe that project?
Sure.
It's hard to see.
Yep, just to locate where you are, this is the backside of the high school. The project we were just talking about would be located right here, so the parking lot coming around the backside where the turbine is. So this goes around the backside of the high school. The tennis courts would be up here. This is just indicating it's a very low area. You can see these contours as close as they are. That's because you're walking uphill or walking downhill. So we actually found where the contours spread apart, and we're able to find a relatively flat spot. It's a steep grade to get up to that, so you had a parking lot for it. But the feeling was that you could actually use the locker room still here. You're not busing the kids to fields and what have you. So that was the closest site within the current high school property. And that's the cost that we presented for the
Yep.
second natural turf field.
And there was a requirement to have a road up there because of ambulance access, obviously, and some level of disability access for the parking area. There are no stands, lights, or anything attached to that other natural grass field.
So to locate where we were again, it's up and back right here.
I really like the penetration on field options, and it's quite a sophisticated design when you look at the cross-section of the field that you showed. So just to orient us who aren't experts on synthetic fields, if you were to think of the $2,000 Tata and the $50,000 Lexus, where would this field fall in the range of spending that you can do to get that type of service?
You're talking specifically for the artificial turf field?
Yeah, but just for the artificial turf field, is this, as good as it gets, or is there some economy built in? I just wonder about the range of costs that can be spent and where this one falls.
Yeah, it is, everyone's familiar with the Patriots, and they tend to replace their field every year or every 2 years for different reasons. but it's the same turf that you could get at Gillette Stadium, basically. It's the same turf product, it's the same profile. So it's a premium
Okay.
upper end surface. And it's probably, it's a higher price surface because you're looking at an alternate infill product. The EPDM we spoke of costs a little bit more than SBR rubber because SBR rubber is basically ground tires. So it comes at a lower cost than EPDM. But in terms of the profile, the 2.5 inch profile, the infill mix, and all the rest below it, it's a, you know, top of the line facility equivalent to a college or professional facility.
Well, that's good to hear, because in my interest in getting the right solution personally and for the town, I talked to someone in the Garcia Parra baseball organization about artificial turf fields, and they said in New England, that's what you need for kids' sports. However, it's a big mistake not to get a field like what you just described in the premium range, because the cheaper fields, if you try to save a few dollars, will really, in the end, not be satisfactory for safety and durability and the way they play and everything else. So thank you for your answer. I just had one more question. Just listen to your whole presentation. It's very good, right on target. But when we walked in, we got a sheet passed out. I gather this rec committee is I applaud them for providing a vision for the possibilities on the use of that property at Gus Canty. And if we did grass here, is the implication from the bullet point number 5 on the Falmouth slide that we would still need the football field down there? That would be a practice field or something, so we could make sure and have an acceptable quality for the actual stadium field at the high school, and therefore some of these alternative uses of that piece of property would not be open to consideration. Is that the implication?
Yeah, so I don't think they've even seen that sheet, so they can't answer.
Well, you guys.
But again, we're looking at that 3-to-1 ratio, 3 natural turf fields to 1 artificial turf field. So yes, from our perspective, we would still need to have access to Fuller Field if we go natural turf at the high school, and we'd have 2 natural turf
So it
fields
would
there.
still have to be set up and preserved for
We'd
use
still have
as a
to use it.
football field. And I mean, the numbers
Yes.
are great. I've done a lot of research online and otherwise, and these numbers add up, and this is the story. It's just a matter of what kind of field do you want. So
Right.
thank you very much
Exactly.
for this work. I appreciate it.
I have a
Dr.
question.
Clark? Can I go to Dr. Clark and then I'll come to you? I'm sorry, I didn't see you.
So just so I understand it, if you had natural turf fields, you would have one in that spot that you selected, back behind the parking area, in the back of the school,
And here.
what you call the wind turbine. Your second one would be the one you showed, probably out in the woods, which is no farther away than the girls' field hockey field. It's a distance, but not that far.
Right.
And then any third field is where you go back to using some portion of the Fuller
A
field.
Fuller Field. Yes,
Thank you.
yes.
2 weeks ago when we were here, you were talking about encapsulated crumb rubber, and I see that's off the table. And we're talking about the virgin rubber now. I'm wondering, can you tell me what the composition is of the virgin rubber? Is it essentially the same rubber a tire is made of, but it hasn't hit the road and picked up all the pollutants on the road? Is that what we're talking about? Or what is the virgin rubber compared to the crumb rubber without the pollutants you get on the road?
The product that we're talking about, EPDM, it is a virgin material in that it's never been used
On the road.
on
But
the
it-
road or anywhere else. It's
But it's the same composition as what they make a tire from?
It's actually a different composition. The SBR, if you want to just go back to that slide.
Where did you say it was? Ethylene, propylene, diamine?
Right. So it's 2 different chemistries, basically. This is the rubber that's used in the tires, the styrene, butylene rubber. And then this is the actual
It's manufactured for that product.
right. It's basically manufactured. This type of rubber is manufactured most typically when it's not used for this. It's the material like that they would make window gaskets in a car out of, that type of rubber. It's got a lot of resiliency to it. That's the type of material. Now this is specifically produced by a company for use in artificial turf fields. So it's made to a certain diameter, certain grain size, so that it works well with the sand and provides basically resiliency to impact.
So just as a comment on safety, the SBR itself is not a threatening material from a safety standpoint. And yeah, it's even more innocuous.
Like
The
you
big issue is the processing aids and catalysts and other things that they put in there to make tires onto the thing, arsenic and other things that cause the problems. These base materials are not really that bad if you're worried about health things. But if you're going with EPDM, like you said, it's a window gaskets.
I was also wondering about, you said that you need water, but in the heat in the summer, when the temperature is much higher, you do have to water those fields to cool them down so they can be used.
Yeah, some municipalities have asked us to put in water cannons or other things to do that. I think they've generally found that they try to schedule their practices around, the peak windows of hot in the day, 11 to 2 or something. If you read any of the studies on cooling the fields with water, it does provide a dramatic cool down of the field, but it's very ephemeral. It lasts, for 20 minutes or 30 minutes or something, and then it goes right back up. The other thing that I've heard from some coaches that have done it is that it just makes it humid. So instead of being dry, now it's dry and humid. So it's better to try to schedule around. The coaches sort of know that it's a hotter field, know that the players need more water breaks, etc. And try to get through that last window of summer, those 2 weeks in August when you're starting those those captains practices and so forth. And then it's usually not as big of an issue, when you get into September, October, etc.
And typically, the heat issue is more of an issue in the middle part of the country, south, where you get a much more prolonged, 90, 100 degree temperature, continuous days, versus up here, one day in the 100 and you're back down into the 80s. You don't typically get that prolonged period and the issue with the heating.
Okay, so we have a question right here, and then Mr. Heelan,
Yes.
you're next. Okay, go
Chris
ahead.
Matthews, I have an answer for her and also another question. My daughter played on artificial turf all last summer. A lot of the high schools around have it, a lot of colleges around have it. When you leave high school, most of them have it. There's about a 10 to 12 degree temperature difference between on the field and off the field. We actually put a thermometer on it every single day, cloudy, sunny, everything. It does run a little hotter, but it's not as hot as you would think. It's not like grabbing a tire and doing it. It doesn't hold as much heat as you would think being a rubber product. It is still playable. It is hotter. The girls do say it is hotter, but we actually physically put a thermometer on it and measured it. And the average for the week was 10 to 12 degrees from off the field to on the field. So it wasn't a dramatic increase. It wasn't 20, 30 degrees. Question for you on, you have your 3-to-1 ratio as far as fields. Are we still considering building a stadium with lights and seats and everything and putting a grass field on it?
Yes, if we were to
Okay.
do a grass field, it would be the same project except for
So
the material and how
here's my problem with
the
that.
field was built.
As a parent of students that play athletes, during your fall sports season, you have one sports complex now, we'll use that word. You have 10 teams in fall sports in Falmouth that need to play. So even if you allowed every team one practice and one game, you have 20 teams essentially on that field. Now imagine your front yard, if you ran 20 teams across it, 2 teams a day, which means you can't even get all the teams in there, what would it look like? Why would we essentially waste money? Because coming from a property management perspective, which I do, you can't fix a lawn fast enough, grow roots fast enough to have that grass take hold for these kids to play on. So essentially, we're gonna end up, even with the best maintenance crew in the world, you can't physically fix that grass fast enough to do it. So I guess it's a rhetorical question of why you would, I understand people want the option, but I
Right.
think they need to take that little bit of perspective and go, run across your front yard in weeks, all week and see what happens.
I understand, and just keep in mind the directive from town meeting, which was,
I
we
understand
were
that.
directed to make sure that we provided the community with both.
I agree with that, and I'm just saying, our kids are at a disadvantage because of, we practice on grass and we have to go play on turf. A lot of sports, it's a totally different game. Turf to grass, it's not anything. We have a lot of kids that are athletes as well as good students. They go off to college to play, D1, D2, even D3 schools, all have turf. 95% of them do. So you're taking a kid that has spent their life on grass, really excelled, and now they're gonna go play, they might as well be playing baseball instead of football. It's just a totally different thing. I think we should encourage people to look at that perspective, to give our kids that opportunity. And I know town meeting has said they want choices, but I think they need the perspective from the people that are actually doing it, and hearing it from us, and question us about what our kids are actually doing, or question the kids even better.
Thank you. So I need to go to Mr. Heelan, and then Mr. Afonso, and then Mr. Brown. So can we start with you?
Yes. Michael Hanlon, I'm on the rec committee in town. Just so everyone knows that if Delphila Field right now is a football field, if we are able to move that sports complex to the high school, that will free up a lot of space for us. And part of the senior center vote last year gave us $300,000 to build a new playground. So by moving the field, the sports complex to the high school, we would have $300,000 to build an inclusive playground, splash park, outdoor recreation for everybody at the site of the rec and the senior center. So this isn't just a sports complex for the athletes to use. This opens up avenues for everyone in town to use other things in town. Tom Zine is up front, and he wanted to talk for a minute. Can you piggyback on me?
Can I just go
That's fine,
through,
yeah.
I'd like to go through the questions,
Phil won't
and
talk
then
long.
I'd be happy to come back. So I think what I hear you saying is that moving in one direction as opposed to the other has a wider benefit
It's
to the
more
community.
advantageous to everyone, all ages, all ability levels. It's not just a football field, it is a sports complex plus outdoor recreation for everyone in town. So we have to look at the entire picture, not just one small sliver.
Thank you. Mr. Afonso, you're up next.
Yes, thank you. I love the ADA compliant outdoor swing set you guys are pushing forward. Some of the slides online are impressive. Two quick ones. Number one, do we have anybody here that can speak on the goose poop directly? Have our kids gotten sick? Have there been any illnesses that have come directly from the goose poop?
That's a really, really good question, and I don't have a direct answer to that.
Because I have heard that some kids, when they've gotten scars and they've had blood issues from, punching each other, whatever kids do in sports these days, the fecal matter had gotten into the wound and created some sort of MRSA or SARS related issue. So I just didn't know if the coaches or if the faculty or if anybody had that.
I can't speak directly to it, Mr. Afonso, because I don't have data around that.
Sure.
But what I can tell you is when you go to some of our schools and we have kids out playing at recess, it's...
Oh, it comes home on their clothes and their
Yes,
sneakers and their
It comes
shirts?
into the building, yes.
Oh, yeah.
And it gets on our little ones.
Number two, do we have anybody from the DPW here?
Just to give them the benefit of the doubt, they did have attended some of the committee meetings and have participated in these committees, so we're part of this.
As it stands right now, do we know how many workers are dedicated to just field maintenance?
Not enough.
I do not know
So
that.
I do. The answer is one.
Assuming sort of the question, what we were what we were tasked to do, and then we passed this along by the town CFO, was so that we did not have to get into the discussion about DPW staffing. Is we just asked these good folks to price it out like it would be contracted out. So that's why they did that.
So with these gentlemen here, would you be able to answer the question, how many dedicated year-round DPW workers or field maintenance workers would it require for a natural turf and artificial turf? Two-part sort of answer. And then I'm done, thank you.
Well, I don't think from the numbers that we presented, that equates because it's all contracted out. Some of the numbers that we got back from our clients, though, said, you know, we're mowing our 24 fields twice, 3 times a week, from anywhere from 25 to 35 weeks a year.
So would that be somebody, the Gale study that came back, did you guys read what that had said? I mean, I guess maybe what I'll do is I'll ask the chairman of the recreation committee. My good sir, how are you, by the way? How many, according to the Gale study, how many DPW workers or field maintenance worker full-time would it take, number 1, for natural grass, and number 2, for turf? Because at the end of the day, like I said, we have 1 currently dedicated Falmouth DPW worker for all of our athletic fields. So, Mr. Brown, Chairman Brown, my good sir.
Well, caught a little off guard.
You're good.
Prepared. But my recollection is that the Gale Associates Athletic Field Report had a number of variables, which there would be a full-time foreman and some, maybe 1 or 2 year-round employees under the foreman and some seasonal workers to maintain the fields, primarily from, I think the months were from March to like November.
For natural or for turf?
For natural. And for turf, I don't recall.
I think it was 5 to 6. Phil,
Sir.
So we
GY has
have,
5 full-time employees for the high school.
so we have some costs around maintenance, but we didn't get into DPW and person numbers. So I'm going to go on to Mr. Brown, and then Mr. Zine, and then Mr. Finneran.
So did I understand correctly then, if you add 1 turf field at the high school, that frees up a Fuller Field to be used for other purposes, you wouldn't need that field anymore?
We would not need access to Fuller Field.
Okay.
Am I
One
correct?
artificial turf at the high school.
If
Right.
artificial turf at the high school, yes.
But
Was
that
that
doesn't
your
fix all
question?
our field problems in the town. We still
Right.
have a lot of work to do.
Absolutely. Nope, I'm only talking about for that program.
Right, for that program.
Yep, just for that
Good
program.
point, good point.
Mr. Zine?
Everybody get an orange sheet? So thank you for acknowledging the work that was put in on the sheet. Good evening, my name's Tommy Zine, I'm a Recreation Committee member. We were tasked with discussing the positive reasons and benefits for the Recreation Department and the Senior Center in regards to the football field moving to the high school. We're also tasked with discussing the proposed all-purpose field at the high school as well. As a Recreation Committee, and most of us are here in attendance over there, we're excited about the move of the field, because once the football program moves to the high school, then the game and practice areas at Fuller Field can now be used for the vision that we share for it. We passed out a document with our ideas and thoughts on it, but before I read it, I would like to remind everybody that there are only a few ideas and thoughts that we put up on that piece of paper. And I'm quite sure there are many more ideas that have yet to be discussed. So just want to go over the document with everybody that you have in front of you. And I'm just going to read it, and hopefully we can engage in some discussion afterwards. I'll start with the bolded part. The Recreation Committee strongly supports the proposed move of the high school football program from Fuller Field to the high school campus. As such, the town will benefit in the following ways. Number 1, with the senior center being built at the spot of the existing playground, the football field area will be needed for a new, all-new exclusive playground that costs $300,000, which has been appropriated for. Number 2, the football field area can be used for outdoor senior activities. Activities such as bocce court, exercise station, walking track, splash pad, summer camps, play areas, social events, and if space is available, pickleball. Number 3, outdoor junior activities can take place during the fall because presently the freshman and junior varsity football program playing on Saturdays on that full field. Number 4, it's going to allow us to make Arnie Allen Diamond a permanent first-class baseball facility with permanent fencing and stands. Number 5, it's going to allow for a larger number of residents to utilize the fields on a year-round basis for outdoor activities. Number 6, town and school committee will save monies from busing football players from the school to Fuller Field. Number 7, the move of the football program to the high school campus will eliminate wasted travel for the high school football players. This time can be better utilized to stay on campus for extra academic help, general studying, and other productive activities. Number 8, this will allow the Recreation Committee to design a permanent plan that the town will be proud of and that will support both seniors and youth, both able-bodied and handicapped. Number 9, the locker rooms, training facilities, video games, and weight room used at the recreation building for the football program can now be used for the recreation activities. Number 10, this will increase parking availability that was lost during football practice and game times from players, coaches, and fans using the limited parking at the rec building. Number 11, with students not having to get transported to Fuller Field from the high school, this will eliminate any risk of motor vehicle accidents taking place and players not being supervised. And number 12, this will reduce Cascanti Recreation Center custodial work. Almost done here. We'll go to the second highlighted area, bolded area. The Recreation Committee supports the high school initiative to have an all-purpose field on the high school campus. 7 line items here. Number 1, multiple sports can practice and compete on this all-purpose field. Number 2, create a greater spirit of camaraderie among students and other programs on the high school campus. Number 3, less weather-related cancellations. Number 4, less weather-related injuries. 5, the field can be rented out during the off-season for tournaments that will help bring folks to town. Number 6, more parking availability on high school grounds for athletic events. And number 7, this will eliminate the health risk of kids playing on fields littered with goose poop, fecal matter that we just talked about. And then there's a highlighted area at the bottom that we put in. Please note that in May 2002, the town voted in favor of moving the high school football program from Gov Fuller Field to the campus of Falmouth High School. This was also strongly supported by the Rec Committee. And that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you for your undivided attention.
Thank you.
So we want to just focus, we need to make sure we're focusing on using
I
our
agree.
resources.
And we need to go back to that, but I do have a question from...
First off, I totally agree with the Recreation Committee and their aims and desires. I mean, there's nothing to argue with that. And Chris, your points are all well taken, and I know for a fact that you do a lot of work on your own, just maintaining the fields and keeping them up. But again, this is a bottom line issue, and none of these things do anything to address the other 23 fields that we have. And I'd also like to point out that the piece of land I spoke of is directly above the A and right at the border of the black and the white on that screen. It's not that far away, and as I say, 25 years ago, it was a perfectly level agricultural field. Probably grew whatever they grew in town on it for the last 150 years, so it would lend itself perfectly to a sports field.
Thank you.
And then I'd like to ask you guys, in your addressing this issue with the irrigation and the pump well that you noted, this town has a huge wastewater problem. And one of the biggest part of our problem is what we do with the tertiarily treated water. Now, a lot of towns are requiring, and the list is growing all the time, that in their public areas, they use purple pipe irrigation. The sewer plant isn't very far away. Was any of that considered in this evaluation?
Well, actually, I'm a very strong proponent of effluent reuse, which is what that's referred to, using reclaimed water. They use it on the golf course on a project we did down in Yarmouth.
Absolutely.
But the difficulty here is still you'd have to pipe it that distance, and that
Very
versus
far.
putting a well in and connecting it. You still have to put the irrigation system in.
Yeah.
So it's
So you
really,
didn't
you're
address the
offsetting a
purple
well.
pipe at all?
I don't think the cost, and all we did was put an allowance in at this point. So.
No was the answer.
Thank you, thank you. Is there anything else from, oh, Dr. Clark?
Well, question for them?
Yep.
I didn't want to.
No, go ahead. We're going to take questions and we're wrapping it up. Go ahead.
One of the areas that gets a little emotional and speculative rather than scientific, I think, is the issue of injury rates. In your study of good quality artificial turf versus highly well-maintained natural turf, is there any reputable data about rates of injury on those two kinds of surfaces for athletes?
There's a lot of information in the literature on both sides. Penn State's one that comes to mind. They've got a lot of information. They've got a program that studies a lot of the pluses and minuses of both natural and artificial turf fields and the injury rates associated with them. So we can certainly provide Patrick some of those links or.
I can provide you with one.
And,
There's only two artificial
Mr.
turf
Finneran,
fields
could
in
you
all
wait,
of
please?
baseball.
Mr. Finneran, could you hold on a second, please? We have the health risks and benefits. This is part of another subcommittee, and I was going to give this to you when you left. So we do have a chart that one committee worked on, and we do have reference pages that you can also take a look at to see how we came up with the data that we did.
My point to that, so the document that Nancy has right here, I'm assuming that health document for natural grass versus artificial grass
Yes.
is if the natural grass is well kept up. Because none of our fields in this town are well kept up. So when you're looking at that document, any health issues, artificial versus natural, that's for well-maintained natural, not fields that are in poor condition. So keep that in mind.
Thank you.
Actually, to comment on that, so the health data that is available for injury rates on grass versus artificial turf are actually using actual playing fields in different states. And so that in fact, the actual condition of those fields is not known.
We don't know
It's
that.
probably a range, so it's probably not necessarily well-maintained fields. So it's a range of actual use. So any of the epidemiological data, like from Washington State, for example, is actual fields. Okay.
Final questions for our good folks?
I have one
Yes,
question.
please.
On all the slides we just saw this evening, one thing from this orange sheet of paper, the locker rooms, training facility, video room, and weight room at the rec. I didn't see anything for storage, locker rooms.
So that's absolutely correct, and that is outside their project scope. That's a project that we've taken on ourselves. We actually have, Mary Gann's had to leave, but have met numerous times and have identified what we believe is a very simple but effective way to do some renovations. We have a meeting coming up with another expert to address the capacity at the high school to have space for visiting teams to come in a separate entrance and home team to use a separate entrance. So that is being addressed. It's not part of their project scope.
Not part of their scope, it's part of ours.
I just want to
And
make
also
sure that is
for storage.
because that's a very important.
Yes.
Thank you. Good
It's a
question.
good catch. Okay, we'll take our last question. Oh, well, actually, we'll go to Stephen, and then you'll be the last one. Go ahead,
Just a quick
Stephen.
question.
Hey.
I'm sorry.
Okay, go ahead, Stephen.
Well,
then
I'm
I'll-
speaking, can I speak as a resident?
Thank you.
Yes.
As a resident and a coach in the outdoor sports, I agree that the fields in town have a lot of work to be done, but I think we're muddying the waters when we lump this project into that. And I want to make that clear that, especially as a resident, I feel that this is such a great enhancement to our town, this project, that to even talk about the other fields is not relevant to this project. And I don't want that kind of, that need to come across as something that this project needs to have done.
Thank you, Stephen. Yes?
Just clerical, is this presentation available to us later to look at? It's a very good presentation, answers a lot of questions that everyone has had.
I think it can be. Yes.
On the committee website or?
Yes, we've had it before. You'll send it to us again? Okay. Okay. We will make it available. We'll put it on the website under the fields.
There were some copies available here.
Okay, awesome. Did you hear the
Great,
vision?
yeah.
Did you take a copy? Yes.
And I was talking to a turf guy yesterday, and as far as the geese are concerned, there's a product now that they're using. It's all natural. I think it's a byproduct of the grape industry, which is supposed to be working very well to keep the
Grape?
nooses off the natural turf, natural fields. And then most, or a lot of the field supervisors just have border collies with them when they're working. And the geese get trained not to go
To
around.
get away. Thank you. All right, thank you all very much for joining us.
One more question.
Oh, we do have another one? I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I didn't see
Real quickly,
you.
can you just,
Yep.
what's the next steps? So take us through what happens next, when do we get this to a vote, what's the
Okay.
timeline?
Great question. So the committee will continue to work, and which is, again, comprised of our 3 subcommittees. They will put together a recommendation, a formal recommendation, take it in front of the school committee, I believe, on March 13th.
Yep, for first.
For a first run, first read, presentation, and then we'll be going back to the school committee, and it will be voted, our recommendation will be voted on by the school committee on March 27th. And then we'll make a presentation based on the recommendation and the vote of the school committee at town meeting. Those are our
So
next
these
steps.
good folks will have promised to attend the March 13th meeting
Yes.
of the school committee, and they will be, regardless of the direction we're going, they will be at the town meeting also, as
Awesome.
available. Okay?
And there'll be a full presentation across all 3 of the subcommittees.
Yep, awesome.
All right?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Wait a minute, one,
last one.
yes, okay, go, you go.
Is there any chance next meeting, there's another meeting, can you start it a little later, like
So
6?
school committee meeting is the
School
school committee
committee's at
time.
6:30.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our subcommittee, do we have another subcommittee coming up on it?
Five little tough sometimes for a lot of parents and working people to get here.
That's a really good point. Thank you, we'll try.
But that's definitely the school committee
But
meeting.
show up at the school committee, yes. Okay. Thank you very much.
We got some of these?
No.